With that, we'll go ahead and get started right into today's presentation, the 2025 Pennsylvania Alternative Residential Energy Provisions Update. Here's a quick description of what we're going to cover today. And it does say in this special 30-minute webinar, but in light of last week's recent change in the potential for the effective date of implementation of the 21 codes being pushed back a little bit, it might be a little bit longer of a presentation as I will go over some of those details. But the majority of today's presentation, we are going to look at, what the Pennsylvania alternative is, how it can be incorporated into your energy compliance pathway for here in Pennsylvania, and we'll look at some of the updates. This isn't going to be a whole encompassing update to the Pennsylvania alternative. It's kind of an overview, what's changing from the previous iteration and how you can use the Pennsylvania alternative. We will be picking this up and continuing it on in our September 9th webinar titled Energy Code Compliance Options in Pennsylvania. That'll be the first webinar for our 2025-26 webinar series. So you cannot register for that yet. That will be coming shortly, but if you follow our social media or anything like that, you will be noted and updated on when those items will be posted. So first things first, the code update, what is changing, right? This is what started this whole thing into motion with the updating of the Pennsylvania alternative, and that is the updating of the new base code here in Pennsylvania under the UCC, or Uniform Construction Code. And we will be transitioning from what we're currently under, the 2018 IRC, into the base code of the 2021 IRC. And I do say base code, and if you've been to any of my speaking engagements or things of that nature, you've already heard this before. But we call it the base code because that's where you're going to start from. There are a lot of amendments that have to be incorporated into the building code here in Pennsylvania under the Uniform Construction Code. They include the statutory amendments and specific RAC amendments, which we'll touch on briefly. But you've probably also seen this slide and its former iteration that actually had the July 13th date not crossed off. But when is this changing? And the anticipated effective date for the PA UCC code changes was July 13th. And that July 13th date was never really set in stone. That was just the earliest that the codes could have gone into effect. Historically, looking back at the previous code changes, that early adoption date was typically the date when those new codes did go into effect. However, this case here, that is not going to happen. It's going to be pushed back slightly a little bit. And it's not that anything was done incorrectly. It's just an administrative pushback. So things are going to continue moving on course. Just that effective date of implementation will be pushed back. So there are getting into the details on how that all happens is kind of outside the scope of today's presentation, but it all gets kicked off when the RAC submits their report to the Department of Labor and Industry. That happened back in before October 1st of 2024. That was then received by the department, and then they are required by law to submit the Review and Advisory Council's report without changes through the state regulatory adoption process. And that's kind of where we're at right now. They are currently going through that adoption process. As soon as we hear of a new date, we will let everybody know through our different channels, whether it's through our social media campaign or through email. But as soon as we hear that date, we will be pushing that out. Two questions that I do want to address that I've received since a week ago, last Tuesday, is number one, does this open up the avenue for some of these changes to be modified? And the answer to that is no. The RAC did their review, they submitted their report, and that report is completed. So it's just, again, the administrative side of things through the department. The next thing is, does this mean that we aren't going to adopt a new code here in Pennsylvania? And that also, the answer to that is no. It's going to happen. It's just that date was pushed back slightly. So keep in mind, follow our avenues, social media, and sign up for our email if you haven't already received those, and we will be sure to get that out to you as soon as we hear. So why does this date matter to everybody? This slide here says it all, hopefully. Looking at Act 36 of 2017, which was amending Act 45 of 1999, which is the Pennsylvania Construction Codes Act. Looking at Section 304, it does say in subsection C4 that where a design or construction contract was signed before the effective date of regulation, the permit may be issued under the Uniform Construction Code in effect at the time the design or construction contract was signed if the permit is applied for within 6 months after that effective date of regulation. So what does that all mean, right? We were looking at a date, and as long as that you have a design or construction contract signed prior to that date, you can design and build that under the current or 2018 IRC. Looking forward, whenever that date is selected, as long as you have a contract, design or construction contract signed before that date, whenever that date is, you can still design that and build it as long as you submit for a permit within 6 months. Now, quick question is, what if I have a contract signed today? And does that 6 months start from the date of that contract, or does that 6 months start from the date of the effective date of regulation? And the answer to that is that 6 months starts from the effective date of regulations. That does not the 6 month phase-in period, we'll call it, is not tied to the contract date. It's tied to the effective date of regulation. So if you have a contract signed today and this effective date comes out a month and a half or a month from now, remember, it has to be the permit has to be applied for within 6 months of that effective date of regulations. So really quick, I do want to mention that we can use the chat. If anybody has a comment, feel free to put that in the chat. But if you have a specific question on anything that I go over here today, please find the Q&A pod and ask any question you might have in that Q&A pod. It just makes it a little bit easier for us on our side to separate those questions out and address those in a timely manner. So the last bullet point here is the official effective date of regulation determines what version of the PA UCC applies to the construction project. So again, that date is very, very important, as that is the date in which you have to have a contract signed before and ensure that you apply for a permit within 6 months after that date. So again, if anybody has any questions on that process, the timing of that process, please feel free to put it in the Q&A pod. I'm not going to get into any details on the logistics of how that all happens behind the scenes. Just know that it is in the process, and we'll keep everybody up to date as soon as we hear. So looking forward, the PA UCC Residential Code Energy Code Summary, as I had mentioned, we have the Chapter 11 out of the IRC, the residential provisions out of Chapter 4 in the IECC. They are, for the most part, word for word the same. They do carry through. And then you have to apply the RAC amendments. And again, we will touch on what those RAC amendments are. You also have now published the 2025 Pennsylvania Alternative Residential Energy Provisions, and that's why we're all here today to kind of take a sneak peek into what is in that document. But before we jump into that, looking quickly here at the 2021 IECC compliance pathway options in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I just want to make sure that everybody does understand that there are several compliance pathways here in Pennsylvania where you can look at sections R401 through 404 or 1101 through 1104 out of the IRC. They are identified or indicated as prescriptive compliance options. You also have the total UA option, which is section 402.1.5 or 1102.1.5 out of the IRC. That is historically, again, this is the total UA, so it's a calculated compliance path, and that's typically done through a software calculator called ResCheck. I'll ask a question here later on, what compliance path everybody seems to be using in the past and historically what you've been using. Just keep in mind that, with these Pennsylvania amendments, some of these software providers may not have the capacity to quickly update to the Pennsylvania specific compliance pathway in their software programs. So just keep that in mind. The third one here is the total building performance, or previously known as the simulated performance path. This comes out of section 405 or 1105 out of the IRC. Two typical software programs that help you work through those total building performance pathways is Ecotrope and REMrate. We have had some conversations with the folks at Ecotrope, and as soon as these regs are published in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, they're going to allocate some assets to updating a drop-down tool specifically for Pennsylvania. So that is in the works. And then finally, you have the ERI path out of R406 or 1106 in the IRC. That's the Energy Rating Index option. So really quick, I do want to launch this quick poll. Let me know, what is your typical energy compliance pathway that you have been using in the past? And make sure you scroll down, because it's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then other. I don't necessarily know why I have other there, but looks like as of now, kind of scrolling through this to keep everybody, and I'll show this, the results of this, but the prescriptive total UA res check seems to be the leading pathway so far, followed by the total UA. I'm sorry, the R value alternative or prescriptive pathway. All right, that's slowed down, so I'll go ahead and end that here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. I'll share these results. So as you can see here, the prescriptive or the total UA alternative does lead the pack, typically done by res check, followed up by the R value alternative, which is kind of a, follow the recipe, right? You're working through the code and it says you must put this R value in your walls, and you follow those exact R values. The PA alternative, which is about 11%, so 10 of 95 folks use the Pennsylvania alternative. Maybe after today's presentation, going into the 2021 permitted homes or projects, we will then jump into the Pennsylvania alternative a little bit more. And then total building performance, REMrate or Ecotrope comes in at 5%. So there's a couple other there. There's 2 folks who did ERI and 3 who did the above code programs. But one thing, this is the reason I asked this is, with what we've heard through the grapevine, is that ResCheck has a lot of their assets dedicated to updating the Energy Star program. So keep a lookout for when that might be updated. I heard it's pushed out a little bit. But if you have a contact or whoever you're using to work through that, or maybe you're doing it yourself, you can reach out directly to the folks producing that software and see if they have intentions of updating that res check for a Pennsylvania specific dropdown based on the rack modifications to that's incorporated into the upcoming UCC. So just keep that in mind. I know that, as you can see here, a lot of you are using that. So it's always good to have plans if what you have historically been using for energy code compliance may not necessarily be an option moving forward. So just keep that in mind. So thank you very much for completing that poll. All right, so looking at an overview of the energy code changes, here we have what we're currently under, right? The 2018 UCC, which is the IRC IECC along with the RAC amendments. We've been under this climate zone map for quite some time. We'll zoom in here to Pennsylvania, and I'm sure this is not new to a lot of you. I'm sure a lot of you have already been updated on this, but currently and historically, Pennsylvania has been under 3 different climate zones. And in those climate zones, we have, let me switch over to this one here. In the yellow, we have climate zone 4. And then in green, we have climate zone 5. And then our few counties up here in the north and north central, in blue, are climate zone 6. We've been here for quite some time. Here is our insulation and fenestration requirement by component. This has been this way for the past 3 or so years. So we've been kind of accustomed to this. Now, moving forward into the 2021, We have Chapter 11 out of the IRC, the residential provisions out of Chapter 4 in the IECC. This transition into the 21, more than historical changes, are pretty significant when it comes to the RAC amendments and the modifications to the written published code out of the IRC and IECC in terms of the energy provisions. Be sure that you have a copy of these RAC amendments. I also know that ICC is looking to produce another Pennsylvania significant change book, similar to what they did when we adopted the 2018 IRC, where it's a smaller book. It's not all encompassing, but it does carry with it the statutory amendments, the RAC amendments. The Pennsylvania alternative will also be published in that. They are currently working on that. But for right now, be sure that you have a copy of these RAC amendments. And then you also have the option, again, why we're here today, the Pennsylvania alternative. But looking at the climate zone map, and this does carry through into the Pennsylvania alternative, that's why it's important to take a look at this. Pennsylvania now only has in it two climate zones. Climate zone 4 in the yellow, which is larger than the previous climate zone 4. And then the remainder of Pennsylvania, which is green here, roughly, we'll call it 3/4 of Pennsylvania, is going to be in climate zone 5. Now, I could just switch right to it here. The new climate zone 4, when looking across the required R value, the prescriptive required R values, this is more representative of what we saw or what we're currently seeing in the 2018 IRC for climate zone 5, right? Looking at climate zone 5, these R values are more along the lines of what we've been seeing historically in climate zone 6. So take a look at those. A lot of these will carry through into the 2025 Pennsylvania alternative, but I just want to make sure that everybody is all on the same page with these updates and the modifications. The one thing that I do want to point out here, and Rachel, thank you very much for posting the link to the RAC report, is if you look at the source down here at the bottom, this is not pointing to the IRC or the IECC. This is pointing to that document as well, because right now the only place that you can find this published is out of the RAC report. So very, very important. Hopefully all of you have heard me say this, or somebody here from the PHRC heard them say this many, many times, that this RAC report is critical when it comes to the modifications that the RAC made to the energy code. So now that we kind of have that background under control, let's jump right on into the 2025 Pennsylvania Alternative Residential Energy Provisions. And you might all be thinking, like, why, Chris, you're calling it the 2025? Why is it not the 21? And that reason is listed here at the bottom. And it says, per the Department of Labor and Industry, the Pennsylvania Alternative, or the PAL, is named by its publication year, which does not correspond with adoption with the adopted I codes. Okay, so if you look at, and I don't have it here right now, but if you look at the cover, it does say the title 2025 Pennsylvania Alternative Residential Energy Provisions, but across the bottom it does say that it was developed to be equivalent to the 2021 IRC and IECC as modified by the PA UCC Review and Advisory Council. So that's a little bit of a history on why it's named the way that it is named. So before we jump into the highlights of the Pennsylvania alternative, we always, I can't share it. I cannot share my headcount poll. So we're just going to have to go with the number of folks that are logged in, which is good. That's fine. So we can skip right over this. So as you can see here over on the left-hand side is the title or the cover for the Pennsylvania Alternative. And as you can see there, oh, there it is. Now it's being shared. Thank you. I'm sure Rachel did that for me, or one of the other Darren who's on here as well. But as you guys are filling that out, this is the cover to the Pennsylvania alternative. And across the bottom, you can see that the 2025 Pennsylvania alternative is equivalent to the 21 IRC and IECC as modified by the Uniform Construction Code. But this is based on the 21 and its amendments. The compliance is allowed through the Uniform Construction Code, Title 34, Chapter 403, and we'll take a look at what that exactly looks like. And then this is created and published by the Pennsylvania Housing Research Center, the PHRC, and it allows for trade-offs. One thing that I do want to do is thank everybody who did support and help with the creation and the updating of the 2025 PA Alt. So it was comprised of a subcommittee that was us here at the PHRC, along with folks that are on our industry advisory council. So a big super thank you to Brian Keem, Amy Martino, Tom McCosby, Chad Owens, Jim Royer, John Sekonic, and Frank Thompson for your contributions into the development of the 25 Pennsylvania Alternative, along with the tremendous support and calculation and modeling and industry expertise from Sarah Klein-Tableau and Michael Arblaster, who are our external consultants on this progress or the process for updating the 25 alternative. So thank you very much for your support in the development of this document. But looking at Act 45 of 1999 out of the Pennsylvania Construction Codes Act, it does say that the prescriptive methods for energy-related standards that the department shall, within 180 days of the effective date of this section by regulation promulgation, prescriptive methods to implement the energy-related standards of the UCC, which take into account various climatic conditions within Pennsylvania through the Commonwealth. It should also take into account a balance of energy savings with initial construction costs. So something that is both potential energy savings along with constructability of those details. Taking it one step further is this compliance is allowed through the Uniform Construction Code Title 34, Chapter 403, subsection D1. And it says that the prescriptive methods for detached residential buildings contained in the IECC of, and I have in brackets here because this has not yet been published, right? So it's going to say in the 2021 compliance guidance containing state maps, which it does, prescriptive energy packages, so it has to be a prescriptive trade-off program, and related software published by the United States Department of Energy, building standards and guidelines, ResCheck, for instance, and or the Pennsylvania's alternative residential energy provisions. And this is all a prescriptive versus energy modeling, right? All of these software programs allow for a prescriptive pathway where as opposed to energy modeling required. But looking at the scope of this is exact language out of the Pennsylvania alternative, and it says that the provisions of this document regulate energy efficiency for the design and construction of buildings regulated by the 2021 IECC and or IRC. It also goes on to state that this is not applicable to alterations, repairs, additions, and change of occupancy of existing buildings and structures. So I think I saw a question coming in over here on the other side talking about remodeling and rehab of projects versus new construction. The Pennsylvania alternative is specifically and can only be used for new construction and cannot be applied to the alteration, repair, addition, and change of occupancy for existing buildings or structures. Now, looking at how the program or the Pennsylvania alternative is to be used, there's an entrance requirement that has to be chosen out of a list of entrance requirement options, right? So you choose one entrance requirement or energy enhancement option, and then you will receive all of the trade-offs. This was all done using BOPT, which is a modeling software. And during the modeling of this, Sarah did a great job at taking one of those energy enhancement options and then applying all of those trade-offs. So I always use this scale, and typically when I'm in front of a group, I use my clicker. So I'm going to go ahead and do that super quick. So if we imagine this scale as being shown on the screen here, you choose one energy enhancement option, and that tips the scale to being more energy efficient than the the code, right? So we're more efficient than code. You then can apply all of these trade-offs, and what that is going to do is that's going to tip that scale to be at least equivalent to the written code. It does have the possibility to potentially be more energy efficient. That's just how it works out. But it has been modeled so that you choose one or entrance requirement or energy enhancement option, and then you can apply all of the trade-offs, and that tips that scale to be at least equivalent to the prescribed code. So here we go. We're going to choose one of the following energy enhancement options, and that qualifies you into the Pennsylvania alternative. And here is that list of energy enhancement options. Again, you only choose one, and that's your entrance requirement to use the Pennsylvania alternative. So option number one, you have ductless heat pumps. And then you find over here on the right-hand side of this table are the minimum efficiencies by climate zone. So you have to figure out what climate zone you're in, and then you will choose an equipment that is at least efficient to what's being prescribed here in the table. Now, one thing that might be different is the calling out of the efficiencies for our heating and cooling systems. And it's HSPF 2 and SEER 2. If you're not familiar with that, starting in January 1st of 2023, the Department of Energy changed their testing procedures for heating and cooling equipment. The SEER 2 and HSPF 2 is just the new term, and the updating of the efficiency standards and testing methodology it is better reflective to how these systems perform in those homes. So it's just a new updated testing procedure, and then all of the new equipment that's, I believe, been that was tested after January 1st of 2023, I believe should fall under these new efficiency numbers. So if that's a little bit new for you, that is the reason for those HSPF2 and SEER2 energy efficiency ratings. The option number two is all ducts are located within the building thermal envelope. So if all of the ducts are within the building thermal envelope, then you are deemed compliant and can enter the Pennsylvania alternative. The next one here is geothermal. If you have a geothermal or water source heat pump, as long as you have efficiency rating of 3.6, you are deemed compliant. If you have improved efficiency air source heat pumps, you have to have these specific efficiency ratings: 7.7 HSPF2 and 16.2 SEER2 for climate zone 4, and 8.4 HSPF2 and 18.1 SEER2 for climate zone 5. That, along with number 5 here, which is the improved efficiency condensing furnace installed, are probably what I have seen the most commonly chosen entrance requirement. And number 5 here again is the improved efficiency condensing furnace, and that is a 92.5 AFUE for both climate zones 4 and 5. You also have the addition of exterior continuous insulation. Climate zone 4 is not required prescriptively to have it, so the addition of an R10 continuous to an R20 cavity is deemed compliant, and then R15 to R20 in climate zone 5 is to be deemed compliant. The last standalone option is improved efficiency windows, which is a U factor of a 0.21 for climate zone 4 and a 0.19 for climate zone 5. Now, we understand that not all of these entrance requirements or energy enhancement options will work for everybody. The goal here was to offer a variety of enhancement options so that one can choose one that best fits their construction and design process. Looking at options 8 and 9, they are package options, which include, for 8 is windows along with an increased R value for your attic. And you will see some footnotes being on some of these descriptions. So this one here for option number 8 is footnote B, and it says that must be full height of uncompressed insulation, and it shall extend over the top plate at the eaves. So what that's requiring is R60 insulation, and it's going to require raised heel or energy heel trusses so that you have a full R60 all the way to the exterior side of that exterior wall. And the ninth option here is improved efficiency windows and heat pump hot water heater. So that is also an option for you. Now, again, you only have to choose one of these entrance options to be compliant and enter the Pennsylvania alternative. Once you do that, all of the following trade-offs are allowed. And there are more trade-offs than we're gonna skip that than what's being shown here today. So I would encourage you to download and read through the Pennsylvania alternative to get a better grasp on all of the available options for you. We're gonna highlight some of the new ones though, or the ones that are more commonly used. As you can see here, the climate zone map for Pennsylvania does mirror that, what you can find in the new 2021 IRC and IECC. The first one that I'd like to talk about is the cathedral ceiling option. So the code itself, the IRC and IECC, also allows for this. You can reduce your required insulation if you don't have the space for the required R49 insulation in your cathedral ceilings. You have the opportunity to reduce that to R30. The written code, the IRC and the IECC, limits that to 500 square feet or 20% of the insulated ceiling area. The Pennsylvania alternative increases that limit to 75% of the total living space square footage. Again, this was modeled so that you could have, let's say, a two-story where you have 1,000 square foot on the first floor, 1,000 square foot on the second floor. You can have up to 75% of the total living space square footage fall within this R30 cavity insulation, or ceiling insulation. So you could actually have your entire second floor fall within this requirement. The next one here that we see being used quite often is the ability to reduce your attic hatch insulation from what's required in the 2021 and previous iterations of the code for attic hatches to be insulated to its surrounding surfaces, right? This here allows for the reduction to R20. So it's 2 layers of 2-inch rigid insulation permanently adhered to the backside of the top of the attic hatch. This is for both your regular attic hatch and your pull down stairs as being shown here. So it must be permanently affixed. The next one here is slab edge insulation. The code requires for your slab edge insulation to be installed. So whenever you have that concrete slab within 12 inches of grade, you're required to have slab edge insulation. And the code says that that must be installed from the top of the slab down 2 feet or 4 feet or whatever the required distance is. Looking at the constructible detail of that, it's sometimes difficult if you have a basement and they want to install carpet carpet tack strip when you have 2 inches of rigid foam between your stem wall and your slab. I know the code also now allows for a 45-degree taper of that concrete and that insulation. However, that's still not always the most constructible detail. So the Pennsylvania alternative allows for a 1/2-inch thermal break in those areas, and then you begin that insulation at the bottom of that slab as opposed to the top of that slab. Here is the insulation minimum R value and fenestration requirement by component table out of the rack report. So you can see here that in climate zone 5, we look over here, we're required to have R15 cavity or 19 continuous for basement wall value, basement wall R value, and same for the crawl space wall R value. Again, if you're not familiar with why this is split 15/19, the first number is if you're insulating that component cavity only, it's R19, I'm sorry, R19 for cavity only. If you're installing that continuously, it would be R15, right? So 2 different cases. If you're doing a framed basement wall and you're only installing cavity only insulation, that must be installed at R19 cavity only. If it's an unfinished potentially basement and it's a draped wall insulation, then it can be R15. Looking at this is the insulation minimum R value and fenestration requirement by component table out of the Pennsylvania alternative. So looking at climate zone 5 over here. Our R values for the basement is 10 and 13. Again, that's 10 continuous and 13 cavity, and it's the same for the crawl space. It just mimics that of climate zone 4. So you should be good to go there to have both of those, both climate zones 4 and 5 insulated to R13 cavity only and R10 continuous. This is one of the bigger changes that we'll spend a couple minutes on, and I'm already past my 30 minutes, sorry. But looking at the requirement for our wood-framed wall R values, looking at the cavity-only options, and we have a footnote G for climate zone 4, as you can see right here, footnote G for climate zone 4, and a footnote H for climate zone 5. If I did not cover this in detail, but one of the changes moving forward into the 2021 UCC is that there's a cavity only requirement prescriptively for climate zone 5 that's an R23. So that is beyond your typical R value of R20. It is prescriptively R23. So looking at those footnotes, footnote G states that you can install R18 insulation shall be permitted in place of R20 requirement, provided the construction of this wall is of the advanced framing type, has a framing fraction of 19%, and insulation is installed per ANSI ResNet ICC 301-2022 section 4.2.2.1 and table 4.2.2 parentheses 6. Okay, we'll touch on what that is here in a second. And then footnote H, again, this is the footnote to the R23 cavity only prescriptive requirement for climate zone 5, and it states that R20 insulation shall be permitted in place of R23 requirement, again, provided that the construction of the wall is of the advanced framing type, has a framing fraction of 19%, and is insulated. The insulation is installed per ANSI ResNet ICC 301 2022 section 4.2.2.1 and that table. So what does that look like? This ANSI ResNet ICC 301-2022 is free to view on ICC's website. So you do not have to purchase another code book. This can be viewed online for free to show compliance for this this reduction in cavity only insulation value for our walls. So section 4.2.2.1 does state that a framing fraction shall be designated for each segment of the framed wall, that assembly that separates one space from another type or the exterior. These are just kind of highlights on what we're looking at here. A wall segment is defined as a section bounded side to side by wall corners and top and bottom plates. So that's looking at what a framed wall segment is: corner to corner, top plate, and bottom plate. For ratings where the framing is not visible at the time of site inspection, the framing fraction, again, there's that framing fraction, we'll see what that is in a second, shall equal the highest default framing fraction for the assembly component, as listed in the upcoming table. And then lastly here, for wall assemblies using the default framing fraction for each, for their framing spacing and the standard framing type listed in table 4.2.2 parentheses 6, unless the wall assembly is structural insulated panels or SIPs, or steel frame wall, or conditions of this additional section are met. And we'll take a look at what they are. So this is what we were looking at. Again, we were talking here different ideas of wall assemblies that shall use the default framing fractions for their framing spacing and standard framing type unless other areas are met. So we're looking at walls, right? Our framing spacing is typically 16 inches on center. And if we're looking at the standard framing type, it's 25%. Now remember the footnote, jump back to it, says that the framing fraction has to be 19%. So what do we have to do to equal framing fraction of 19%? And that means that it has to be of the advanced framing type, okay? This provision right here says that wall assemblies shall be the default framing fraction, standard framing type listed in 4.2.2 parentheses 6, unless the wall assembly meets this criteria in section 4.2.2.1.1. So if we jump to that and it says the default framing fractions for advanced framing, that's what we're looking for. We have to have advanced framing type are to be permitted to be used if the wall segments comply with all of the following. So the first thing here says that the corners of the cavities shall be completely filled with greater than or equal to R6 insulation. The second point here is intersections with interior walls shall be insulated to the same R value as the remainder of the wall. So you can't, whenever you have an interior wall intersecting with an exterior wall, you can't have compression in that exterior wall. Okay. Headers of framed walls shall be insulated to greater than or equal to R3 for 2x4 framing or equivalent cavity width, and greater than or equal to R5 for all other wall assemblies. So if we're building with 2x6s, we have to ensure that those headers are insulated to a minimum R5. And then the last one here for this first section is that the framing shall be limited at all windows and doors to one pair of king studs plus one pair of jack studs per window opening to support the header and the sill. Okay, so you either have to meet all of those or this 4.2.2.1.2 that says that the assembly specific framing fraction or 10%, whichever is larger, is permitted to be used if the framing plan with the design framing fraction and a professional engineer stamp has been obtained. So you either follow this first section right here, where you meet these insulation R values, or you have an engineered stamp saying that you are meeting at the minimum, in this case, our framing fraction of 19%. All that being said, if you meet these insulation R values, you meet the intent as described in these footnotes, and you can reduce your R20 in climate zone 4 to R18 insulation, or you can reduce your R23 prescriptive requirement in climate zone 5 to R20 cavity only insulation. We can work through this. If anybody has any questions on this process, feel free to reach out to me. We'll cover this again in September's webinar, and we'll kind of go through that one more time. This is 1000% brand new to the Pennsylvania alternative, so I can understand if there are questions on how to follow through with these requirements out of anti-ResNet ICC 301. The next one here is PA 304.6, which is electrical and communication outlet boxes. There is a new prescriptive requirement in the 21 IRC and IECC for this provision. However, when looking at the intent of what they were trying to do, and then looking ahead to the 2024 IRC and IECC, the Pennsylvania Alternative Subcommittee decided that they would like to include this language as a new component. And it says for electrical and communication boxes that penetrate the air barrier of the building thermal envelope, they shall be caulked, taped, gasketed, or otherwise sealed to the air barrier element being penetrated, or air-sealed boxes tested and marked in accordance with NEMA OS 4. Air-sealed boxes shall be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. The difference is the current provisions out of the 21 IRC and IECC state that the electrical and communication outlet boxes that penetrate the building thermal envelope, not specifically the air barrier. Okay. The intent is whenever you penetrate the air barrier, you have to have an airtight box, and that is the intent behind these this section out of the Pennsylvania alternative. So finally here in today's presentation, not only is the Pennsylvania Alternative document published, but we also have the 2025 Pennsylvania Alternative Compliance Worksheet, as you can see here on your screen. This is there for you during permit submission. It allows you to put the project information on it. You choose your entrance requirement and list that, and then you have the ability to put in all of your proposed R values. You can then submit that during permit submission, and that helps you with energy code compliance during that process. This is, again, you can download this off of our website. If you print front and back, you can then have on the back of it, or you can print two different pages, either which way. It has the energy enhancement options available to you over here on the right-hand side. And then it also has the updated R values that are listed in the Pennsylvania alternative as well. So that way, everybody who sees this can all be on that same page. New to the 25 Pennsylvania alternative are these, we're going to call them stickers, right? On the left-hand side, this is a full 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. If you choose a template that is compatible with printing stickers that are 3.5 inches by 5.5 or by 5-inch shipping label, again, it's 3.5 by 5-inch shipping labels, that'll print one sticker per label, and you can affix those to panel boxes or whatever the case may be. Over here on the right-hand side, this is just a blown up version of what this may look like, or what this does look like, where you can put the address, the date, the climate zone, the air leakage testing results, and then down at the bottom, you can enter your building envelope insulation. That way, anybody who looks at that stuff or walks through that project, they will all know what the R values are that was installed. So as I said earlier, these links are active in the digital format of the handouts, which are on our website. So feel free. You can also go directly to our website, and then you can get to the information there for downloading the Pennsylvania alternative, the worksheet, and the stickers. If you are posting a link to the Pennsylvania alternative, we recommend using these links when linking to the document. That way, if we by chance ever have to update something, if somebody downloads it, it'll automatically take them to the latest and greatest version of it.